We're going live. It says going live. We might be live. If we're not live, I apologize. You're live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another lovely edition of the Brandon Bonanza podcast. Today we have another epic guest. But before we get into that, I have a quote that I know my epic guest is going to love because everybody loves this stuff. All right. This is from Gandalf from the Fellowship of the Ring. And Frodo says, I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. Welcome, Nick, aka Woodshop the Wise, aka Woodshop Bear. I just gave you a new nickname, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. And Sync, I just read that quote earlier today.
No way, really?
Yeah, it's one of my favorites of all time.
Oh, yeah. I misquote it on shows all the time, but I was like, I'm going to get it right today and I'm going to pull it up and make it look nice. Oh, man. Yeah, it's I really like it because it's a way, and it's funny because we're going to at least start off talking about writing. But it's a way for a writer to kind of encode a message in. So people are like reading the story and they think they're just reading this adventure, but there's all these little lessons that you read and you could see how it plays out in each character's life. So this way you can actually adopt it into your life. Because a lot of times we'll say on Oversharing or some of my other, even my show, we'll say things like, you don't really know something until you know it, and know it is like biblically knowing it, like Adam knew Eve, like you have to experience it. But sometimes through movies and books and other forms of media, you can actually get a knowing of it and at least have an idea so it doesn't sting you so hard,
100%. That's one thing that I was going to bring up to you, actually. That's funny that you brought it up. That's why I love reading so much, is because it does allow for that. It's a way to carry on lessons and morality and what we call logos, truth, in a not a hidden way, but a way that is much more easily attainable for most people. Most people aren't going to go on these massive, especially talking about like fantasy writing,
Yeah.
more so than anything else. They're not going to go on these fantastical voyages and these quests and these journeys to faraway lands to destroy some ring or sword or whatever the talisman is that they need to destroy or to get. They're not going to do that in real life. So it allows somebody to kind of live vicariously through those characters, but then also take all those lessons home with them, which is it's almost like a form of magic in itself, being able to give people power and strength and empathy and compassion and morality and all of these words that we use with doing nothing other than writing something down and having them read it. It really is powerful.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And a lot of people focus on the negative because it can be inverted. Obviously, you get these movies and music videos on MTV, if that's even still a thing, and they're just like a total inversion. But you take the good with the bad, and there's a lot of good media out there that could be consumed, and Tolkien is just one. There's so many. And yeah, you get that knowing. And then when you're in life, you can kind of, because the writer will use the archetype of, the wizard or whatever it is. It's like the mentor. And so you could start to look to people in your own life, or if you don't have somebody in your own life, you could just kind of look to Gandalf and, be like him, or like Brandolph. That's what I call myself, Brandolph.
That's such a good name. Yeah, 100%. That's what's so powerful. And when I talk, I'm going to talk primarily about like the genre of fantasy, which is a pretty wide genre these days. You have so many different types of fantasy and everything, and that can kind of encompass sci-fi in there as well. But yeah, it's extremely powerful, and you get to live through these people. And if you don't have somebody to look up to, as you said, you totally can. And more often than not, I would argue they're almost better people to look up to than most people here in this realm in reality. Like, a lot of the people that we look up to have such terrible flaws and are battling their own demons, and they fail on so many levels. And a lot of the times in books, you're reading whatever it is, a 200, 300 page book. So you get to experience some of that character development, but they're not failing you every day. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
you're not having to endure witnessing them failing themselves or their families or their friends or whoever it is, on a daily basis. So you can accept those character flaws, and they add a level of depth to the character. And it's what we oftentimes, it's kind of what snares us, and gets us emotionally invested in that character. Because if they're just perfect, then it would be a boring read. But yeah, it's those character flaws that allow us to connect with that person, and then that person can just drop truth bombs and morality and lessons and stuff that we can take home.
Yeah. And then sometimes you can get a character like Gandalf, who is, his real name is Alarin. He comes from like the other side. He's I forget what they call not the Ainur. He's one of these
He's one
he's
of the
kind of like a
Astari.
demigod. What's that?
He's one of the Astari.
Yeah, there you go, Starry. And he's like a demigod, I guess you could say. And so he could kind of have these, not that he doesn't have flaws, but you write it in a way that this is a person that basically is above human consciousness, I guess you could say, and isn't really isn't prone to have those character flaws because he doesn't have the same kind of desires as a man or a woman would have. So yeah, it's just like Gravy City. So so I know you're writing now. I've seen that stuff on Instagram and you've been talking about it. It's exciting, but is this the first thing that you've started writing, or have you written before?
No, nothing like this. I'm the editor for Barataria Times, so I technically write. I write articles, but it's all pertaining to business and some short lifestyle articles and stuff. I've never done anything like this, but I will say it's funny when I hear myself say that, because I guess in a way I have, like, in my head, since I was a kid. You write, it's just the physical act of typing it out onto a computer I've never done. But yeah, I've kind of lived in this fantasy world in my head for so long, because I got into it at such a young age. I got introduced to The Hobbit when I was really young. Well, let's rewind further back than that. When I was a young kid, my grandpa told me fantastical stories. Like, he's an old school cowboy, flat picking guitarist, grew up farming and stuff. And he used to tell us stories about dragons and stuff. Because I grew up in New Hampshire as a kid, and we had 120 acres, and it was as rural as you can get. We didn't have heat. We had one wood stove. We chopped all of our own firewood all summer long to prepare for winter. It was a proper country upbringing. And so we didn't have TV. We didn't have any of that when I was a kid, nothing. So he told us stories at bedtime, and then my dad would read us stories, and both of them are phenomenal musicians. So they'd play guitar and play us all these old songs, and the songs in themselves were not like country songs of today, right? They're old country songs where it actually tells a story. There's a character in the song, and it tells about his journeys and everything. Most of those songs are lost today. So that was like 3, 4, 5 years old. I grew up with that. And then, my parents, we were super poor growing up, but we did go to the library, and we always had books and stuff. So I got introduced to this world of fantasy at a really young age. And then I got into The Hobbit, and then my mind was blown. I read The Hobbit. I think I was probably 9 or 10 the first time that I read it. And it was the best book. And I thought that nothing could top it. And then about a year later, I was frustrated because I kept trying to find books to read, and none of them were good. And then my dad brought home The Lord of the Rings, and he gave me these 3 paperback copies, and he's like, "Here, read these." And I was like, I'm not trying to get involved in this. This is way too many pages. This is way too much for me. I don't even know what it's about. And he goes, "It's what happens after The Hobbit." And I was like, yoink, grabbed him. And I didn't do anything for probably 3 months. It was like an entire summer that I just sat there reading those books. And I just completely blanked out on where we were going with this. You had
You were
said
telling.
something.
Oh, that's all right. I know what you're saying. We were talking about this in another show because sometimes the way your brain works. I was actually talking about this at Rodney Norman because he's like, you go somewhere, then somewhere else, and somewhere else, and then you're just all of a sudden you're lost. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget where my original trajectory was going.
I know you're talking about your grandfather and your dad and stuff.
Yeah. But okay, maybe okay. So where I was going with this was I've always been into this world of fantasy. But I've never sat down and written anything. But I've always thought about it because I had a pretty crazy upbringing. My father left when I was 12. He and my mother split and he was gone. And it was just a tumultuous time, right? We don't have to go into that because that's whatever. It's not pertaining to anything that we're talking about. But the point is, I fell in love with the genre of fantasy because it allowed me like a form of escape from the reality of what I was dealing with,
Totally.
with parents splitting up and a house coming down and all this crazy stuff. So I fell in love with it, man. I love fantasy. Still to this day, it's my favorite genre to read, to write. And it's a way for people to connect, man. Like it's kind of strange being like in your mid 30s and being like super into fantasy writing and having some people be like, oh, that's childish. But I'm like, no, man, sit down and read Lord of the Rings and tell me that's a children's book.
Yeah.
Tell me there isn't more truth in that than your entire lifetime of talking to people here in the real world. I mean, or C.S. Lewis, right? Like read Narnia, read those 7 books. Narnia is that I would argue that's much more of a children's series than Lord of the Rings, but still, man, Lewis is dropping nuggets in there that I'm just like, I would read them and just have to put the book down and be like, whoa, like for those with eyes to see, that dude dropped some serious wisdom in those books.
Yeah. Try being 46. People are like, what'd you do? You listened? Because I was listening to the Silmarillion, at the end of last year and then into the beginning of this year. And then it's, of course, I had to go back and do The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And it's funny because I left it alone for a while. I was super interested and watched videos that would explain it because the Silmarillion is very complicated. So I watched some breakdown videos and stuff, and I really got a handle on it. And then I re-listened to The Hobbit a couple of weeks ago, just in my free time, because I was like, just sometimes I just get into so much gravy that I'm like, I need a break and I just need entertainment, and TV doesn't do it for me anymore. I used to watch too much TV and then I pretty much stopped and then I was on and off, but I haven't watched anything like, I don't know, since last year or something. So I'm like, let me listen to this. And I still get stuff out of it. Every time I hear it, I'm like, oh, like you said, when you have eyes to see, and especially with the symbolism and just the meanings of words, because words, a lot of people don't understand they have different meanings because the meanings change so much. So when you educate yourself or whatever it is, and you start to realize the different meanings of words can mean, just like the word death, most people would associate that with somebody dying, but it also could be an end of a cycle in your life. Like if you change careers, that part of you now is dead. So when you hear these different words, especially like in the Bible or these holy texts you read, it just hits you a different way, I guess you could say. It's like they're transmitting some kind of message. I'm like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. That's one of the things that I like about reading as well, is that, as you just said, typically there's like a certain connotation that one has with a word, but oftentimes when you read it in a paragraph, it comes off completely different. There's a whole different meaning. And that's what, it's with reading. That's what I like about reading as well is, you just talked about not watching stuff for a while. I don't watch stuff very much anymore. I'll watch a movie here and there and then just like immediately regret it and be like, I just wasted my time. That was so stupid. And it's weird every time that I do, because there was, up until probably maybe 5 years ago, I really enjoyed movies. I loved watching movies. I loved cinema. And now I don't, like
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, I'll watch. Those are
Yeah.
fantastic movies.
Yeah.
But everything else, it just doesn't do it for me anymore. But I can sit down and read a book and just, it's incredible. And I think the reason why is because as you grow older, your attention span, your how am I going to say this? It's almost like it's too much packed into 2 hours when you watch a movie, right? It's just constant. And I dissect this in my head every single time. I'll be watching a movie and realize, they just did 20 different camera angle changes in 20 seconds. It doesn't even allow you to visualize what room they're in, or if they're outdoors, where they are. It's just bam, 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 hammering you with dialogue, and there's no descriptors for where they are or anything. That's what I like about books, is that you do have that time. You can read at your own pace. They take the time to describe where the person is and what they're seeing and smelling, and what they're hearing in the background, and what are the leaves on the trees looking like when it's fall, and like all these things allow you to get put into that place so you can really get into the story. And you don't get that through watching a screen. It doesn't matter how good, even the Lord of the Rings movies, right? Phenomenal movies. There's a reason why they're ranked the highest, and they'll, never be remade, or God willing, they'll never be remade, because that would be a tragedy. But even then, compared to the books, it's not nearly as good as the books. Like, there's so much more depth in a book. So
Yeah, totally. The only thing I would be on board with is if they did a scouring of the Shire movie, because to get lost in the weeds a little bit, I think, because I never read the books, and I had only just seen the movies. I just got into it when the movies came out. My roommate at the time got me into it, and then I was like, wow, this is awesome. So I watched all the movies, and then I watched the extended versions, but I was just like, I don't have time to read. And then when I just went and listened, I found an audiobook that was really good. It kind of acted it all out and stuff. And I was blown away by a few things. And one of the big differences is that they didn't include the scouring of the Shire. And I think that is such an important chapter, because it really is the next step in the evolution of all of the hobbits, where they go on this great adventure and they destroy the ring, and now they're these heroes, or whatever, quote unquote heroes, and now they have to put it to work for themselves. There's nobody else. There's no Gandalf or no Aragorn or whatever, so they have to take matters into their own hands, and they get everybody. And not only are they the heroes, they get everybody in the Shire together to come together. Spoiler alert if you haven't, to get them together. That's one thing I noticed. And another thing that I noticed is the masculine characters in the books are way more masculine, I would say. Like, there was no indifference. Like, Theoden King, he wasn't trying to not go to war and all this stuff. He was like, no, where's the war? Let's go get him, and like Aragorn was like, no, I'm going to be the king. He's like, this is, there's a little bit of like whatever doubt, but he knew it. He wasn't like being a little pansy, like, oh, I don't know if I'm good for this or whatever. No, he's like, no, this is, I'm Aragorn. Like, yeah.
There's a lot of things in those movies specifically that they didn't like twist them in a bad way by any means. It's just like, when you're making a movie, even if it is 3.5 hours long, when you're trying to inject 200,000 words worth of writing into there, you have to leave some stuff out. And there's some pretty significant details in those movies that they left out. Like, most people, if you've not read Lord of the Rings, and you've just seen the movies, it seems like it happens so quick, right? Especially at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. It's just Gandalf shows up, and then he tells them to leave, and then they run away, and then they they encounter the Nazgul on the, where they all crouch down underneath and everything. But if you read the books, you find out that Gandalf originally goes there. He finds out that Frodo, has this ring, and then he goes to Orthanc to research this, and it takes 17 years before he comes back
Yeah.
and tells Frodo, it's time to go. We need to go destroy this thing. It takes him 17 years to figure out that that was the One Ring. So that's significant, man. That changes the whole entire tone of the book, is that Frodo's sitting there with this ring for 17 years. And that's just one detail, you know, like, don't get me started on leaving Tom Bombadil out of these. Like, Tom Bombadil is such a massive character, and it's just completely gone. And then if you talk about the Hobbit movies and all that nonsense, that's a whole different conversation. How they kind of butchered the Hobbit and turned it into just this freak thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think I
know.
saw that movie once or whatever. Was there two movies, The Hobbit, or
There's three of
three?
them. Yeah.
I don't even know if I saw the last one now that I think about it, because maybe it was right when it came out, but I do definitely remember the books better now because of listening. I think when I was doing that whole Silmarillion thing, I think I listened to The Hobbit at least 3 times in that range, and then I just listened to it again. So yeah, it was.
Yeah, the movies are they're entertaining visually, but even then not so much. It's all CGI. It's all trying to recreate something that they didn't recreate, or that they created with Lord of the Rings, but they didn't do it the same way. Like, I've researched this a lot. I'm super into Tolkien and everything. And those movies, there was 5 years of pre-production before they even started filming Lord of the Rings. 5 years worth of costume and set design and writing and everything, making sure that everything was perfect. In the Hobbit movies, Peter Jackson was literally writing the script the day that they were filming scenes. They were so backed up and they had nothing planned out, and they just injected all these characters like Toriel, who was not in the books, not at all, and these love triangles, and Legolas is in the movies, which he wasn't in the books, and there's just all this weird stuff in there. So I get, from one point of view, you made this incredible trilogy of movies, you want to kind of duplicate that with The Hobbit, because The Hobbit, it's not like Middle Earth during The Hobbit was any less epic than Lord of the Rings. But if you read the books, that's how it's kind of comes off, right? The Hobbit is more of a children's story, and Lord of the Rings is just crazy. So if you're trying to kind of push it into a more adult realm of theater, I get why you would do that, but it was just poorly executed in general.
Yeah, there's several excuses that they'll give, but I think it was more of like kind of a cash grab. Plus, people just want it, so they know they'd make money. Yeah. We have a question here from Robo Honky, which is like one of my favorite names. Greetings, Brandon. Can you think of an example where a movie was better than the book? That's a pretty good question. Winnie the Pooh. No.
That is a good question.
I know there's one that I would talk about, but it's not coming to my mind. It probably will when I try to stop thinking about it, but
Off the top of my head, I can't.
yeah.
I really can't. Every single time they take a classic good book and then turn it into a movie, there's some grabble. There's always a grabble.
Yeah. Sammy in the chat said, personally, I like the movie Hate Ship, Love Ship better than the short story. I also like Flowers for Algernon more than the story. Yeah. Well, there's some examples for you. So, what made you finally put pen to paper, as they say, or fingers to keyboard?
I've wanted to for a couple years very badly. I've just been too busy with everything that I do, running the wood shop, and then I was doing freeze drying foods, and then making coloring books, and just, throughout that whole time we had 2 children as well, and then all the corona nonsense, and trying to navigate running a business through that, and having supply chains breaking down, and juggling everything. It was just nuts. And then at the beginning of this year, my neck finally gave out, and I've just had time. It was I suppose I could have made the time before, but in the midst of all of that, when like, my wife is super high risk pregnancy with our second child, in the middle of Corona nonsense, like right in 2020, right, is when she's carrying her second child, and then having to provide for her while she's high risk, and then has a C-section and then has to heal from that. And we also have a 1.5-year-old at home and everything. It's just, there was so much going on that when my neck finally gave out and I really was grounded for months, it made me kind of rethink, what I'm doing with my life. It's like, yeah, I could continue working at the pace that I've been working and kill myself, or I could maybe try to explore some of these other avenues that I've really wanted to do for a long time. And I think that I'm a fairly decent writer. I've had nothing but good feedback from my Bertari Times articles, and those articles I don't proofread. I don't do anything. I sit down at the end of a long day. I take 10 minutes. I blast out an article. I upload it, and it's gone. And then they post it. So I'm like, if I'm getting this good of feedback from random business articles where I'm just telling stories real quick, then maybe if I sat down and actually tried, it would turn into something good. And I think it is, man. I've not had more fun doing anything else in my life. I think I can say that. Like, writing is so much fun to me. And I told my wife the other day, it's something that I would love to just kind of shift into. Like, if this book or a trilogy, what I'm writing, were to take off, I would love to just be a full-time author. That would be the dream.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. I really enjoy writing as well. It's there's just something about it. It's just so free because you could write whatever you want. I didn't write fiction. I wrote a book kind of about my life and then about what I saw going on through like all these pranks, like the 7-Eleven was an inside job. And but I just talked about like the people's behavior really in society and how it shifted. And then I also talked about kind of how I shifted my own behavior and I put it all together like that. But now I'm writing a book more about, I guess it's like self-healing, because the name of my first book was called Shadow Worked. And a lot of people thought there would be some stuff about shadow work itself in there, which I kind of talked about it because I talked about my life, but I didn't specifically talk about it. So that's more what I'm talking about now. Just stuff like cultivating your intuition and victim consciousness and how we're raised to basically be victims, which really just means we're raised to be slaves and we're just really a slave to our own terrible brain. And then because we're in that state, people that are aware of this can come along and then be our master because they're masters in their own right, even if they're, dark or light or whatever it is. So yeah, it's a lot of that stuff, but I could see fantasy, man, that's got to be, or just fiction in general has to be even more free because there's no, there's truth obviously, but there's no facts that you have to worry about getting wrong. You're making the whole universe, like.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how, excuse me, how has your experience been writing in that style? Because that is the thing that I like about writing fantasy, is that you can still inject all of that truth and all of those lessons and all of that wisdom into the book, but you are able to world build and create this whole immersive experience for the reader. I would find it much more difficult to write it from a nonfiction point of view, or like a biography type, trying to explain things that I've been through just point blank. I think that would be much more difficult.
Yeah, because I'm stuck with this world. Love it or hate it, everybody. I'm stuck with this world. That's what I say. Yeah, I think that I liked it because I got to talk about myself. And a friend of mine was helping me at the time and I sent it to her and she was like, my friend Ashley, who I did the Terrible podcast with, she was like, you should include more stories about your life. So I kind of went through and rewrote and just added a bunch of different stories anytime it felt like it fit into the thing. So it was really cool to remember all the stuff like I wrote about being in the Marine Corps and stuff. And yeah, so that part of it was really fun. But it definitely is different. And the other thing too that I have that's different now is I found a better way to actually write because I could never get comfortable. excuse me. So I got an iPad recently, and I had a like the pen that comes with it. You can get a pen or whatever. Actually, I got it on. It was probably some shady Facebook deal. It was like still in the package. I'm like, is this thing stolen? But so and I was able to do that. But I found that just typing with that, because I got this kind of tripod thing, so I could just sit on the floor and I put it right where I need it, and I could just kind of type and then do things. So I just been hammering it out. So it's been awesome. I actually just wrote a letter to Owen too. I'm going to send it tomorrow. Same thing. I was just like bang, like hammered it out, because so many times I'd go to write and I wouldn't finish or this or that. Yeah. So now I'm just like on course. I think that's really important too. Do you use a computer, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I just write on my laptop. I've got a tiny little, it's not even like the standard 15.6 inch. It's like a 13 or 14 inch tiny little laptop, which is hilarious because I'm 6'4", right? Just like
Yeah.
a mountain. Um,
Yeah.
but I like it. It weighs nothing. So I have that. And then I have one of those little padded lap stand type things. So it's not sitting directly on your lap. And I'll just sit in a recliner and write, or on the couch, or I'll take it outside when the girls are outside playing and just sit there and write. Um, I enjoy doing it that way. I don't think I could do it if I had like a desk where I had to sit down and write. That would feel way too this world for me. I like to be able to go outside and, if I'm trying to think of if I'm writing a sentence and I need like a little bit more description, I like to be able to just avert my eyes and look up at the wind blowing through the trees rather than staring at a wall.
Totally. I've been sitting outside too. It's great. You get the sounds of nature, the sounds of your neighbors, like with their mowers. But no, it is nice to be out there. It really is, in the sun sometimes or whatever. It's just a totally different experience. Maybe that's what it was. Because last time I had my laptop, but I think I was mostly inside doing it, just shut up. And I was like listening to, I remember when I wanted to finish it and rewrite it, I was listening to Bach on the organ, and I was just like blasting it, and I'm just like writing away like no 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 no. Yeah, it was great. There'll probably be a phase of that when it comes to the end, so when I have to rewrite or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's great being out there. That's awesome. Well, we have somebody says in the chat, Zindra Shamania. I probably said that wrong. I was thinking about writing a kind of sci-fi novel based on my life, but I don't feel like I'm much of an author, although I guess I am kind of good with words, but being an author seems next level. Yeah, it totally is next level. And that actually brings me to what I was going to say, because I started off originally with a blog in 2013, and I would write on there a few times a year, few times and I was basically just writing about all the stuff that I saw around me that I didn't like, because people, I think, were sick of hearing me. So I'm like, I'm just going to put this in a blog form. I started writing about all the silly laws that they were passing in Connecticut because of the whole handy sook thing with the whatever that was. So I started there, and then I got into comedy. So I wouldn't write as much, but every once in a while something would happen. It would piss me off. And instead of taking to Facebook, I would just go to my blog and just and then I got into more of like libertarian ideas and like anarcho-capitalism and all that stuff. And I started writing about like the drug war, and then all the wars in the Middle East and all this stuff. And it just, if nothing else, it built confidence for me, I think, because I went back the other day and I read something I wrote from 2013, and I was like, I wrote this in 2013. I'm like, this sounds like what I say now. There's just like a couple different things I've adjusted my worldview about or whatever, but I was like, wow, I was on point back then, but I think so. I would say that would be the key, to just find something where you could build a confidence, because I really kind of believe that when you're doing this stuff, you're tapping into spirit, or the ether, or the Keshic record, or however you want to say it. And it's kind of pouring out of you with your point of view also. And I feel like anybody has that gift. It might not be in writing, but if you feel compelled to write, then maybe you should start. But, some people it's music, some people it's art, some people it's comedy, whatever it is. I think those are always the ones that we like. When Owen is on a tear, that a lot of that stuff is just like coming through somehow. It's just it's an amazing thing to be able to do. And the other thing too is I feel so awesome after I do it. I feel like I really did something or I accomplished something. Even when I did my blog, I'd publish it and I'd be so happy about it. You know, it was like because a lot of times you get, I always notice, I was writing about this too, you kind of feel like you should be doing something, and then you like watch TV or a movie, or you try to engage in this form of escapism, whatever it is. You know, a lot of people go out drinking or whatever, but there's this voice, it's like your intuition kind of telling you, and then you have your ego or whatever, that voice in your head that basically developed from when you were a kid and as you got older, of like treating yourself like a piece of shit because the people around you, not that they treat you like a piece of shit, but it's the way that we get our motivations or whatever. So there's a lot of negative self-talk. So when those things come together, you have this feeling like you should be doing something, and then you have this negative talk that's like, oh, you're just wasting your life or whatever it is, you know. But when you could get them to work for you, it's really amazing. And that's just comes by practice. Nobody just like wakes up and they're a great writer. I mean, I guess you could be, but you still, like you said, it took you a while to get to this. And that's another thing I want to say about that too. I think that's perfect, because it's possible if you did start writing earlier, you wouldn't have the same worldview that you have today. So it might have came out differently, you know? So now you have a whole different worldview, and you can write from that point of view as you're channeling or whatever you want to say from the
100%.
Yeah.
I've wanted to write since I was a kid. I've truly wanted to write stories and fantasy since I was a kid, and I always thought about it. It's one of those weird things where you know you want to do something so bad, but then you go, but what am I writing about? And then it's just like deafening silence. You know, like you have nothing to write about. You don't know what story you want to write. You don't know what the characters are going to be like. You don't know what the theme is going to be. You don't know anything. So for me, it's been like 20, probably close to 25 years now of knowing that I wanted to write, but having nothing to write. And then it just clicked a couple months ago. I was sitting down and I was like, my wife asked me, she's like, are you okay? Because you just keep staring off. It's been days and you're just like sitting there staring off for like an hour. And I was like, yeah, I'm writing a book in my head. She's like, really? And I was like, yeah, and I think it's going to be decent. Like, I'm not a perfect writer. It's not going to be on Tolkien's level either, you know, because I'm not that educated. I'm not that good with words, but I think it's going to be good. And I was just mapping it all out in my head and everything. And then I just sat down and it just started flowing out. So, yeah, man, if you want to write, because that's a beautiful thing about writing and publishing as well, especially if you do traditional publishing, is you're not in it alone. Like, get the stuff down on paper because you're going to do edits. You know, just get the story down to start, and then you can go back and you can reread it. Once you've got it all out on the paper, go back and reread it, and you will find words that you want to change and sentence structures. You'll move paragraphs around, you might move chapters around. You'll find these things that you, reading it through, how am I going to say this? You have the story in your head, right? And then when you read it on paper, you can go, no, that doesn't sound right. That's not matching what's in my head. And then you'll find a way to restructure that and make it read a lot more smoothly. If it's super clunky, you'll know that. So get the story down. I just put a post up on my new Instagram page about this with The Wind in the Willows. The author, that's a beloved children's story, right? Like, we all know The Wind in the Willows. It's been around for 120 years. The author, those were a collection of short bedtime stories that the author made up in his head and told his young son when he was a boy at bedtime. And many years later, his son told him, you should write these down. And so he took a few years and wrote them down and put them into story format, where it plays out. All these different little short stories are kind of wrapped up into this one larger story. And it's incredible. Like, people still love it 120 years later. And that never would have happened if that guy would have kept that locked up inside of the vault in between his ears, you know?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's so important to just get the story out, because that's what I did in my first book. And then I did that. I moved around, like I had like paragraphs. And I'm like, that doesn't go there, but it just was coming out at the time. So I just wrote it. And yeah, you just move it around, and that's another fun part. It's all fun. It's all like part of the creation process. And then you can even get somebody involved that's an editor or somebody, or that's just even a trusted friend or like your wife or something, and they could go through it and then kind of give you their point of view, and then you could decide if you want to take that information or you don't want to take that information. So somebody said, have you written manuscripts or comedy sketches, Brandon? That's what I would like the most, but preferably collab with someone else and do everything myself. But not sure how to start. I would say just get a blog. That's what I always tell people when they say they want to write. Just get a blog and start writing and putting it out there, and then see what happens. I did write some comedy stuff, but not a bunch of it. Because I think with my main focus, I mean, I love comedy, but the whole human behavior thing for me is fascinating, and all the stuff that I've gone through, and that all the stuff I was never taught, like all the stuff we're never told. I went through all that stuff, and I just like to share it. And that's what I wanted to say too, because you said you might not be Tolkien or whatever, but since this is a different time, I mean, those stories are timeless, but the times we live in now, you can write, and that's what I've been doing, because I've even been simplifying my writing and like cutting down all these big words and just making it for a modern audience, just so people can read it and it's an easy, fun read, and it's nothing that's going to be too complicated. It's I tell people, I used to do this in the car business. I sold cars for a long time and all that, and then I got into the service department area, and I did really well because I understood how engines and transmissions and all that stuff, I understood how it worked. I just wasn't good at fixing it, but I could explain it to somebody and tell them exactly what was going to happen or what was going on, and they like loved it. And now I'm just doing that same thing, but just in the area of human behavior or whatever you want to say, like, yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, that's an important point that you just brought up. Nobody's ever going to be Tolkien, but that's the beautiful thing about prose, right? Is it's like that's your signature. How you write the characters, how you write the dialogue, how you describe things. That's what makes you individual as an author. And that's one of the most freeing things that I've found about writing is, I think we all will have self-doubt no matter what it is that we do. There's always that nagging little whisper saying, this isn't good enough. You're not good enough. Why are you even doing this? But then it's like I let my wife read while I was writing this first book. I let her read along. I would do whatever, 3-4 chapters and then let her read it. And I just look over at her while she's reading it, and her eyes are just wide and she's reading it. And then I would see her like sniffling, right? She'd like be tearing up and crying a little bit, or I'd see her chuckle to herself, or she'd get done and go, ooh, I have such goosebumps. Keep writing. I want to know what happens next. So I go, even though I'm doubting myself, my wife is giving me that affirmation, right? Like that you're doing this well. And she would make it a point to say, it's not just because you're my husband. Like this is legit a really entertaining, like gripping book. And then I've got it in the hands now of almost half a dozen beta readers. So that'll be, I'm really excited to hear what they all have to say about it. It's fun if you're in the bear community. If you listen to Owen Benjamin, you're in the community. There's a ton of references in the book that you will pick up on immediately.
Nice.
But they're not obvious. Like it's not something where a normal reader would read it and say, what does that mean? Right. It's just sayings and stuff that we say. So yeah, it's super fun. I love the idea of writing in general. So I mean that Zindra, if you want to write, just write, put it down. Because as Brandon said, you'll have editors as well, especially even if you want to self-publish, you can find editors and pay them to go through. And that's what they do all day long. They're professional editors. So they will tell you what's clunky and what reads weird and what's great. And if you need to switch things up, they'll let you know. There's always people out there. And like what I'm doing right now, I shipped it out to like half a dozen beta readers and just told them, not so much grammatical errors because I don't think there's a ton of them in there, but I'm going to do multiple edits and I'll catch them eventually. But just overall, like how's the pacing? How's the dialogue? How's the whole vibe? Is it engaging? Is it boring? Are there any slow parts? There are people out there that really like doing that. So if you want to write, get it down and then ship it out to them and, wait to see what they say.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to be able to accept criticism. I think that's something where I'm glad that I waited till I was a little older, because I could take the criticism now better, because I understand. I mean, I just understand people have different point of views and they think differently and all this stuff. So when they come at me with these different ideas, then I don't have to take it personally, and B, I can decide. Then it's still up to me if I want to decide to change something or flip it around. And the cool thing is, when you share it with a bunch of different people, sometimes there's a common thread that comes. So like, example, my first book, I wrote it all in like third person. I basically wrote it like I referred to myself as like the author, and I did it all like that because that's the style I had been writing in for the articles. It was like business kind of style or whatever. And a bunch of people were telling me that I should change it to like first person or whatever, or away from that. So I haven't done that yet, but I was thinking I'm probably going to do that and make it more, I guess, easy to read and personal, because at first I wasn't really concerned with how easy or not it was to read. I was more just like, this is my story. I want to tell it the way I want to tell it. So with this one, I'm just coming at it first person and just talking about my own experience kind of thing. But again, I like distilling it down. But the thing is, though, when you do share it, you can sometimes get a common thread, and it's really helpful.
Yeah. And there's people that really, yeah, it's like we want to know everything and we want to think that we're right about everything. But it's so much cooler when other people have a better idea than you, and they're giving it to you from a place of wanting to make your work better, not make you feel bad, but genuinely make your work better. I shipped my book out to NB Austin, who's here in the chat, Old Wise Bear, and he read the first few chapters and he let me know, the second chapter, maybe think about doing it this way instead, because it just kind of pulls you out of the story a little bit. And it's something that I wouldn't have thought of. And the second he said it, I was like, I 100% agree with you. And I went back and I scrapped that entire chapter, rewrote it, and the whole
Nice.
story flows way more smoothly now. And it's awesome, man. It's such a cool feeling knowing that people are out there who genuinely just want to help you put out a good piece of work. So
Yeah, somebody said in the chat, where was they said like sometimes you could be your own worst enemy, and I totally agree, because with that negative self-talk, you're gonna just talk yourself out of even doing it. That's basically what happened with me in comedy for years. I didn't start until I was like in my mid 30s, and yeah, I would just say, if you want to do something, just go do it. Whatever it is, do it. And even if you don't become a writer or whatever it is, you're still taking time to do something that you love to do. So it's really an act of like self-love. And I feel like, they say you can't really love your neighbor if you don't love yourself. How can you properly love your neighbor? So if you're taking the time to do that, there's a lot of different boxes you're checking off, with this whole self-love stuff. You're taking time away from distractions from other people, and you're making it your own. And I don't know. And also, I just think the more you do it, the better you get, whatever it is. It's like, even like basketball, there's like some pro basketball players that sucked, and then they just practiced every day. Now they're in the NBA allegedly. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
yeah, 100%. 100%. Zindra asked, what is your book about? It's a high fantasy book. I don't know how to talk about it without giving stuff away. I haven't written like a good brief description of the book yet, but it's high fantasy. There's elemental magic. It's pretty epic. The first book is epic in itself, but then the world in the second and the third book, it's going to become so expansive. There's ice walls, there's castles, there's airships allegedly. There's a lot of cool stuff in it. So
Are there dragons, or can you not say?
no, not dragons, but a variation of serpent-like creatures for sure. Yeah. But it is, I mean, it's like what I'm trying to do is like, there's there's a ton of characters in it, right? Because it's a big community, but there are two main characters, and then there's all these other kind of side characters, but I would call them almost like co-main characters because they're so prevalent in the books, right? And what I'm trying to do is interesting because you have your classical hero's journey, and we all know about that. If you know anything about reading or literature or anything like that, you'll know the typical hero's journey. So where the two main characters start is like the beginning of where someone would start on a hero's journey. And I want to have it be multiple other people are also taking their own personal hero's journey, but they're at different stages of it. I think that would be an interesting dynamic because in most books you have the main character going on the journey and it's so centered around that person that it doesn't really you don't realize that everybody could be going through something like that. So it'll be interesting trying to write that, but it's a challenge that I'm really looking forward to.
Are there any other races of beings, not like like how there's elves and there's humans and dwarves? Do you have that kind of element in it?
So I took the approach. So what I will say is that like there's only a certain number of tropes, right? Like you can only put a certain number of things in a book. You can have the wise old wizard or druid or whatever it is. You can have the dark lord, who just wants to destroy. You can have the fellowship of people that come together. You can have the magical talisman. You can have the journey, physical journey to wherever. So there's only so many tropes that you can have. So yes, I do have a variation of that, but it's not like a different race of beings. It's I'll say the bear riders literally ride bears, which is epic. And then the enemy are called the Din, which is a play on words for Jinn, and they ride serpents. And then there's other classes of people. So instead of having different races of people, it's they ride different animals, if that makes sense. And it sounds so cheesy now, but when you read the book, it's epic and it makes way more sense and it's way cooler because you have these fights between, an army of people riding on bears and then an army of these giant serpents coming in and fighting, and then throw in like elemental magic in there, and it's going to get really, really cool. I'm writing the second book right now. I haven't been writing too much on it lately. I've been trying to get caught up in the shop and just trying to soak in the last little bit of summer that I can before winter hits, and things have been crazy, but I think I'm 7,000 or 8,000 words into the next book. So, wow. But I have the second and the third book completely mapped out. It's just a matter of sitting down and, actually writing it out. So,
oh, that's cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Awesome, man. That's really cool. Yeah, I think it's cool to take a break because there's no rush, now that you already started the process and you already have it down, you have the first book done and out and everything. Well, not totally done, but out of your head at least. I think it's good to take a little bit of time, like a breather,
Yeah, and I wrote that first book with 70,000 words and I wrote it in like 3 weeks.
Wow.
So, yeah, dude,
You've been busy since I talked to you last time.
Yeah, last time I was like,
show.
Yeah, that was my birthday, which would have been almost 2 months ago now. And I was like, I think I might want to write a fantasy book. And now we're talking. I'm like, yeah, first one's written, second one I'm 10,000 words into.
Yeah, I'm going to take credit for this because I was like, just write. No, yeah, I think I said something like that.
Brandon is 100% the catalyst as to why I wrote these books. You'll get a shout out in the book for sure.
On the Oversharing show, he was like, you got to write, or I'm gonna. No, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like writing, man, and I like reading. I'm like, as much as I like writing, I like reading. It's just I've been reading a ton lately. I've been, kind of laid up with all my next stuff going on. And I've just was like, yeah, I might as well read. So I blasted through all the Narnia books I'm reading right now. There's a series called the Wing Feather Saga, which is just epic. It's by this Christian author. There's so much logos in it, but it's fun, man. I haven't had that much fun reading since I was a young kid.
Oh,
It's
that's awesome.
yeah, and I'm on book 3 of 4. It's incredible. If you have kids, anybody out there, and you're looking for like, I'm halfway through book 3 and there is no gravel yet. It's just incredible. Hollywood wouldn't touch it. Like they just straight up rejected him because it does through the book. He talks about the maker and all this stuff, and it's all about family, and they're beautiful books, but they're high fantasy. They're really fun. And Hollywood wouldn't touch it, so it's now the biggest crowd-funded animated children's series ever. People just came together and funded it, and I think the first season there's a trailer for it on YouTube. I think the first season drops sometime in December of this year, and then they're
Oh, that's
crowdfunding
awesome.
for season 2. But I've just been reading like crazy, and Andrew Paul said haven't finished the Wheel of Time yet, but I'm on book 3 or 4. That's awesome. I want to read Wheel of Time as well. That's one that I never read when I was a kid, and then I found out that there's like 15 books, and I'm like, oh, I'm jumping headfirst into that soon. That's on my to be read list for sure.
What's the name of the book? Did you say the name of the book you were talking about, or the books?
Yeah, the book series is called the Wing Feather Saga.
Oh, yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, so just look it up. You can get it everywhere. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, probably Target. I mean, you can get it anywhere. But yeah,
That's cool.
I love reading. I'll tell you a fun story just about
Please do.
books and just how powerful they can be. When I said this earlier, I read The Hobbit when I was like 9 or 10, maybe. I read Lord of the Rings when I was either 11 or 12. And so when I finished reading Lord of the Rings is right when the movies came out, right? I finished the books, and then I finished the books that summer, and then I think the Fellowship came out that fall or winter, if I remember correctly. And so I was like, it was perfect time for me, right? Because I had just finished the books, and I'm like, oh, they're making movies. The trailer I saw on TV, and I was like, you got to be shitting me. I just finished these books. What are the odds? And
Synchronicity.
so, yeah, so I was huge into it, right? And I was like 12 years old. So you're starting to go into puberty, you're in middle school. You can't be talking about Lord of the Rings, dude. You're getting made fun of and mocked like crazy. And but there was this kid that I went to school with who was super cool dude, and we became like best friends in middle school. We went through elementary school knowing each other, but not being that close of friends. Middle school, we got really close because we were in all these different classes together. And we were both little shits, man, getting kicked out of class all the time, cracking jokes, constantly little troublemakers, but in an innocent way. And he liked Lord of the Rings too. He was super into it. So we would spend all day sitting there nerding out about it, talking about the movies. And we ended up kind of falling apart in high school. And then a few years ago, we started connecting again and talking. And he's super cool dude, just this based Mormon dude living in Utah, like still just like I remember him, just a legit hilarious dude. And we were talking, and I don't know what sparked it, but we ended up having a conversation, and he thanked me, or maybe I thanked him first. I don't know. I think I might have thanked him first. Thank you for being friends in middle school, man. It's been so long, and I obviously we were in middle school. I would never talk like this. No child does, but with all this hindsight and life experience, you realize how important those friendships were and how much they helped you through. And I told him, when we were friends and we were talking about Lord of the Rings and stuff, that was a highlight of my day, was going to those classes, because my parents were getting divorced and my life was falling apart. And I just, it was nice to be able to go and just hang out with you and nerd out on stuff and feel like I wasn't being judged or anything, because my home life was so terrible. And he ended up telling me, he's like, I've been wanting to say that to you for so long. I know we haven't talked in like 10, 12 years, but at that time, I didn't tell anybody, but my older brother was dying of cancer. And like I was watching him die in my house, like those couple years that we were hanging out and stuff and talking about Lord of the Rings. And he's like, same. He's like, I can't even explain like how terrible my home life was, and just seeing him get weaker and weaker and failing and eventually dying. He's like, that was the highlight of my day too, was just going to class and hanging out and talking about books. So that is kind of a big part of why I want to do this, because you don't realize the impact that you can have on this world, even indirectly through the things that you create, right? It wasn't the book that changed our lives. It was the fact that the book existed and we both read it, and it was a commonality that we had that we both liked, that brought on a friendship in real life that is now, I mean, dude, I was 12 years old when we were doing this, and I'm 34 now. So it is 22 years. 22 years of friendship, man, just because of a book, So when I'm like, when those thoughts of self-doubt kind of enter my head, and the little gay demons start whispering, I'm like, no, man, because my life was changed by a book. So I don't know whose life I might change.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought that up, because I was actually gonna ask you about that, if you thought about the ripples that you might send out into this realm by doing this. And that is really such an important aspect. I mean, just the show that I do, and the stuff I've done, the show I do with Sharon and the book and stuff, when I hear people, even though like, millions or whatever haven't read it, it's even one person saying to me, wow, I really like what you said here. This really made me think about this or this, that, it's like, this is awesome. And that really goes back to, kind of what I feel like walking my path, like people will say, they'll call it like Dharma. And it's funny because I talked about this for the show. I kind of wanted to bring up words. People like talk about walking your path, but Dharma is what that means. It means that you're not creating karma. And basically karma is when you're creating ripples out in the realm, I guess you could say, and you're just going about living your life kind of more of an ego point of view. And when I use words like this, some people think it's about new age concepts. And what I was saying to you, which you totally agree with, is a lot of these words that we use, it's just like when a churchian or the Pope or somebody uses the words that are in the Bible or the stories or the ideas or even the names of Jesus. And they use them for reasons that might not be what they were intended for. I'll just leave it at that. It's kind of the same thing with the new age. They have all this, they found all this truth that was contained in all these writings that are ancient, and they kind of are using them in a way because they feel like a lot of people get sick of Christianity because they see the gravel behind it. And instead of going to the next level of Christianity and just trying to live like Christ, they'll think it's all fake or they think it's all BS. So they get into either agnosticism or atheism. And I feel like that was my path. And then I came back into it because of, I guess you could say, new age stuff that I got into, but I was able to stay away from a lot of the graveled stuff because it just didn't hold me. And then I was able to come back in now with the stories of the Bible and Christ and all this stuff, and kind of incorporate it back into my life. So when you hear these words, everybody, you don't have to worry. It's not all new age stuff. I totally get it though, why you would think that. But I feel like when you are walking your path, and you can even just say like the path of Christ, like you're modeling that, like an archetype even, right? Like we were talking about, I feel like that's when you really are contributing to the betterment of this realm or just people around you. And not only are you healing yourself, but you're healing other people around you through healing yourself. You're kind of elevating everybody. It's like you're vibrating on a higher level. And then because of that, you're not letting people around you affect you. So they start to vibrate or fall away, and it really is an amazing thing. And that's the other thing about writing or any kind of art that you're thinking about doing. like when I started doing comedy, I met all kinds of amazing people. I had all kinds of amazing experiences I wouldn't have had. And it's just this self-doubt. Like the worst thing you could do is fail. That's all. And then if you fail, you just try it again and you just keep going and going. So that's really what I would say to anybody out there that's thinking about this stuff. You know, it's like just do it. You know, Nike, I know they're terrible. They they have all these poor Chinese kids, you know, making shoes, but they know about words. You know, just do it. And I don't mean go like play basketball or whatever. I mean go create art, do yo dharma or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, facts just make things happen. Words are funny because it's like you can fully communicate without them. So like stop giving them so much power, you know. There you could get to a point where like if me and you were just sitting there in a room for like 10 years, there would probably come a point where we wouldn't talk anymore. It would just be like communication will be done through like either like grunts or hand, you know, waving or whatever, or just looks, you know. It's like I have two young children. I don't even have to say anything. I can just come in and just based upon where my eyebrows are, they know like maybe I should stop screaming right now. And I don't have to say a word. Like communication is entirely possible without using words. So, as you were saying, you know, like words can have different meanings. And yeah, they can, but also just don't freak out about words. I saw a funny meme yesterday, the day before, and it said, in asterisks, the word queer exists, and then it's a picture of Tolkien saying, "I'll take that." It's like it made me laugh pretty hard because he drops a Q bomb here and there all the time, but it's like at that time when he wrote it, it just meant peculiar, you know. It was a strange thing. It was an oddity. So communication, words change all the time, but
Yeah. Sharon and I have talked about this where I think there was a time where people didn't talk, and the Tower of Babel, I think, is kind of a shout out to that. Maybe it wasn't at that time, but it could even be like an allegory for that situation where like people just communicated in a different way. More, you can even say telepathically. And another thing I talk about was I don't think telepathy is like I tell you, you know, go get me some milk or whatever, or, you know, do this. It's more like you get a feeling. It's just like intuition, but you can pick up on other people's, and especially when you're in the room because there's all kinds of nonverbal communication going on and stuff. So I think that that's where the real gravel is. It's in the talking. And of course, I love
well,
to talk because I have a show. So it's not like I'm telling you not to talk, but I think at least if you're aware of that, it could make your life so much better, because when someone's saying something to you, even if they're like mad or whatever, they're trying to get a rise out of you, you can realize they're just making funny noise. You know, to quote the great Joe Rogan, people just making funny noises with their mouth. That's when he still would say certain words that he doesn't say anymore. But he's like, it's just a funny mouth noise we're making with our face. Like that's really what it is at the end of the day. And yeah, but you can also use it like art form and create a beautiful story or a book, you know. But I think if you
yeah.
can kind of take yourself out of that and not take things personally, and then also realize words have more meaning, yeah, it's just a whole different ball game.
Yeah. Um, Zendra just asked, do you have any good tips for a really good book that is a single book only and not a whole series? There's a lot of really popular ones right now. If you're talking about fantasy style books, that's mostly what I read. And I will put a caveat out there and say for 10 years, I didn't really read much fantasy. I was nose deep in just research about other cultures and lost cultures and stuff. Like I would sit there and blast through like Michael Tellinger books in like 2 days, like hundreds and hundreds of pages of all this heavy information. And I got into like reading Zechariah Sitchin and stuff and all these books. And uh, I still have them. I have probably 100 books about ancient cultures and stuff that I read. But if you're talking about fantasy style books right now, there's some really popular ones. There's a book called The Priory of the Orange Tree, which has raving reviews. There's another book called The Sword of Kaigen, Kiagen. That's a standalone book, and people are saying that's one of the best books that's been released in a long time. So maybe start there. I tend to like, I'll read a standalone book, but I really like the series style books. That's my bread and butter. I love that stuff where you can read a book and put it down and you're not done. You know, you still have a few more books to do.
Yeah, I totally agree because there's no finality when you're done reading it. You know, you're like, all right, I could keep the story going. That's why I like Tolkien so much, and that's why I got into the Silmarillion. It's just insane. I mean, yeah, there's a standalone book for you if you want
Yeah,
to call it
yeah,
that.
seriously. There's a quick afternoon read.
Yeah. Oh man. That's awesome though. I think it's great that you're doing this. I mean, I saw it and I was really inspired. It's kind of what inspired me. And I really just started writing because I had this idea in my head and I was gonna make it maybe just a blog post or something. And then I just kept writing and writing and writing. And I'm like, oh, this ties in. And then I just wrote like another chapter. And then I'm like, oh yeah, here we go. It's probably not going to be as long as like one of your books or fantasy book, but I want to keep it simple and easy to read because of what it is. So yeah, but it's great when you start to surround yourself with people who are doing this stuff, doing artwork, and it's stuff that's, you know, you see that if they can do it, I might be able to do something that I want to do too. It's very inspiring because I feel like, especially in this society, we're surrounded a lot of times by people who are just working normal jobs and making the ends meet or trying to get money or whatever. And they'll look at you like, oh, you do comedy? Do you make any money doing that? Like people always ask me that question. And I'm like, money? I'm like, I made a little money, but you don't understand like the feeling I got. Like every Wednesday, I used to go to this open mic at Joker's Wild Comedy Club, which is not open anymore in New Haven, Connecticut, which is so depressing. But and I would during the day, I'd be doing something or whatever, and I'd be like, oh, am I gonna go to the open mic tonight? And I'd have like a doubts, but then I would go. And even if I bombed, I left there and I was like, yeah, I did it. And I was just like so excited. Like it's so crazy. So
Dude,
I feel like,
money is
yeah,
like the worst
yeah,
metric to measure if something is important or not. It always cracks me up. My parents are like that, you know. My mother was like that for so long. She's like, "Oh, you should charge for doing something like that." And I'm like, I don't have any desire to charge somebody for doing whatever it is. I'm like, I have the skill. It's going to take me 10 seconds. I'd rather just do it. Yeah, money's for the G's.
yeah, that's
I
what
don't
people
like
don't
it.
understand. Yeah. It's like, I was in that world when I was like in the car business and sales and stuff, and I could have stayed in there and I could be making like one earlier this year. I went to on my nice little trek around the country and I ended up like, you know, Colorado, Sedona, meeting up with a bunch of people. And then at the end, I went to visit friends in Daytona. And my friend there used to be in the car business, but he opened up a CBD store. Now he has two down there. So they're really killing it. But one of the guys that was from Connecticut, another guy that lived down there, opened a restaurant, but he was still half in the car business because he was worked in finance. And he's like, dude, I'm making easily just making 10 grand a month with not even trying. He's like, I could get you a job like if you want to do it for a while. And I was just like, I can't do it, man. You know, like
Yep.
it's not about the money really. Cause when, you know, I don't know, like I might shoot no, I'm not going to do that. But you know what I'm saying? Like when I'm doing, I wasn't happy. Like I was fatter. I was just like, you know, it's just,
It's soul crushing, man. And it's
yeah,
like you might not, like what you were just gonna say, you might not like take your own life or something, but how many how much opportunity are you taking away from yourself? You know, like I wouldn't be able to excuse me, sit down and write 70,000 words in 3 weeks if I were working 12-hour days in some corporate job, just soul sucking, coming home just full of rage that I couldn't, you know, unleash on people. Um, at my job who are being assholes or whatever. You know, it's like you take all of this, people just dump on you all day long. It doesn't matter what job you have, dude. You have to talk to people, you have to interact with people. And at least in my experience, it doesn't matter how pleasant you are, you're always going to run into that one person because it's like this world is full of demons and people that are just possessed by these evil entities or these whatever you want to call it, spirits or demons or jinn or whatever it is. People are legitimately like possessed by these people, and then you come into contact with them. It's like you can't just go home and then just be like, oh yeah, and then the guy hopped on his bear and he wrote, Like there's this, you have to put yourself in a like peace of mind to create it. You really do. And that's something that my mother and father never understood about me. Was my mom would be like, oh, you're so good at drawing, you know, like I do hyper realistic portrait drawings. Like I'll take a picture and I will draw a portrait with pencils and charcoal and stuff. My mom's like, oh, you're so good at this, why don't you do this all day long? And I'm like, because I couldn't. Like I can't sit there and draw for 10 hours a day, and I have to be like motivated, and I have to put myself into that place. And it's kind of what I just experienced. Like I wrote an entire book in 3 weeks, and then I've written 3 chapters in the past 2 weeks. You know, like you need to take a break and let your soul rest a little bit and find motivation again.
Yeah, totally, for sure. And I think that's another part of the self-love process, or however you want to say it, because if you treat yourself like a slave, then that's what's going to happen. It's going to affect your artwork. And you see it all the time with, in bands that make it big and then they try to crank stuff out and it's just not what it was, or movies, we see constant examples of this all around us. So there really is no rush. And I think the kind of way the way the realm works, I really think that the deterministic element of it, because I think there's free will and a deterministic element. I think that things happen when they're supposed to, just like the quote I read in the beginning. It's really only up to you to choose what to do in that moment, in the time that you exist. And obviously you have to choose to take the time to sit down and do it. But just like you were saying, when, it took you till you were 34 to do it, before it might have just not came out right. And you could have got frustrated with it and you could have just threw it all away, or you could have wrote it and somebody could have read it and not liked some aspect. And it's because you were coming from this place where you were just not ready yet. It's like a fruit that needs to, or a tomato. You can't, well, I guess tomato's a bad example because you can let it ripen in the window, but it's like a fruit. You have to wait till the right time to pick it.
Yeah. And as an artist, like a physical artist drawing, right? I know that feeling so well because I've probably started hundreds of drawings in my life and finished maybe a few dozen. Like I'll get going on it and it's like that initial spark of, oh, I have a good idea. And so I might like map some characters out and get them all inked up. And then I'm like putting color down onto, colored pencil or Copic markers or whatever it is. I'll start putting color down and then I'll just go, I really actually don't like this composition. I don't like how this looks. In the trash. There goes 100 hours worth of work. And there is a moment where you feel like I just wasted time, but then you go, not really, because I got 100 hours of drawing in. That's the one thing that I always try to remember is that it's never a failure if you're honestly giving it all that you have. Like if you're concerned that you're not a good author, well, you're not a good author. Like you've never written shit, like no offense at all to like Zindra was talking about, like, I don't know, it seems like being an author is on another level, and it is, because to be there you have to put in the work and you have to do this repetitive writing for X amount of time. I just wrote a book. I wouldn't consider myself an author at all. Like I still have a lot of work that I need to do. I'm still writing sentences and paragraphs, and then I'll go, that paragraph looks gigantic, and realize that I could condense 3 sentences down into 1 sentence. Like I took 40 words to say something that I could have said in a dozen. So
yeah. Do you feel like you kind of leveled up at all though since you finished? Well, even though you're still kind of working on it,
100%.
right?
Yeah. I had this talk with old Wise Bear who was reading the book. I told him, when I started, like I look back on the first act of that book and it read so clunky. But as I was writing it, with each chapter, I was getting better and better at it. Yeah, it's definitely something where you level up the more that you do it.
Yeah, it's crazy. I noticed that after I finished mine too. I was just like, I don't know what it was. I just was like, something feels different. Like, yeah. I think it's that sense of accomplishment. Maybe it's even a little more confidence and all that stuff. Yeah. Zindra says, so how does one earn money to survive without being a salary slave at a soul sucking place? See, you're already a pretty good writer. Look at all that
There you go.
alliteration, right? Is that what they call it? I mean, the rent needs to be paid and food on the table. How do we survive outside the hamster wheel? That's a really good question. And I can't tell you the answer. I could tell you how I did it, but I don't know if you're going to be able to become a DJ. I
I
could
was just gonna
train
say
you.
the same thing. I was gonna say start a wood shop and sell digital files on Etsy and fix people's cars and do freeze dried foods and make coloring books. I mean, that is a good question, and that's something that you really have to consider because I like Brandon. I could go out and get a 6-figure salary, no problem, with my intelligence and like what I'm capable of, and I could do it no problem, but I refuse to because I'm not going to let myself go down that path. I would much rather um I always feel weird saying stuff like this because I feel like I'm almost like daring God to do it, but it's like I would rather struggle and make money like honestly doing things that I can do but don't completely crush me, which is why I do the wood shop and I sell digital files on Etsy for people that have laser engravers, right? That's not going to pay my rent every month, but it's a significant chunk every month. Like it's 100% passive income. And I always, anybody ever needs a car fixed or something, they know that they can come to me because I've been wrenching for 20 plus years and they could pay, my mom was staying with us for months. She just left about a month ago. But she was staying with us while she was caring for my grandmother who's failing with dementia. And she was driving down through Portland on a main street and her radiator blew. Like her car overheated and it literally just stopped driving while she's on this major highway in Portland. She had no idea. She called me. So I drove out there one night and I diagnosed it. Her radiator just cracked, right? So she looks up average radiator repair for her make and model was like $1,200 to $1,500. And I went out and bought the radiator for $246 and I spent an hour dropping it in the next morning and it ran just fine. So I do that stuff all the time for people. It's like if you don't want to be in that soul sucking corporate environment, you really have to learn valuable skills. I think that's one of the pitfalls that a lot of people get into is going, well, I don't want to do this, like I don't want to go get the corporate job, but also like, why is my weird, obscure niche thing that I'm trying to do not working? And it's like, well, maybe because there's not a huge market for like underwater, gluten-free, cat yoga. Like you can't just say, this is something that I want to do and then expect there to be people that are going to pay you money consistently month after month to do it. You really have to find something that's valuable, like fixing cars, or like the files that I make and sell on Etsy. That serves a really valuable purpose to people because there's a lot of people who don't have the time or the energy or just simply the know-how to go on to, Adobe products and make these digital SVG files. They just want to pay the $2 or $3, download the file and be able to make an ornament for Christmas or something. So I'm filling that void and saving people countless hours of time having to learn it. And I would say if you want to stay out of that corporate world, you got to think in that term. Like think in those terms. Don't think in terms of what do I want to do. Think of what could I do that I would find enjoyable, but also isn't going to kill all of my motivation and is important enough that people will pay me to do it.
Yeah, totally. Kind of like Owen says, you provide a service for people. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and the other key, I think, the element is to have no fear when it comes to that stuff and just kind of trust in your intuition or trust in God or, however you want to put it, because there's signs all over all the time. There's always the way this realm works, allegedly, there's always something that's kind of trying to steer you the right way. And I feel like the way I like to put it is I think we kind of have a higher self, because the way I believe this realm works is because it's consciousness. And because time is technically just an illusion, I feel like there is a part of us that is has made this process already, and then it is already at the stage of, you know, a higher consciousness. So it tries to communicate with us with these synchronicities as well. So I feel like, I mean, I'm always going to say just do work on yourself, cultivate your intuition, and then also what Nick said, what Woodshop Woodshop the Wise said is also very important too. You have to have kind of both of those elements going, really, but you don't always have to, because like I started DJing and I was a mess when it comes to all that stuff. You know, I just showed up for work and I was consistent and I wasn't afraid to do hard work, because it sounds like it's all fun. And I always thought, I was like, oh, it's just really fun. And then when I started doing it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of hard work. Like you have to carry all this stuff with you and set it up and then break it down at the end of the night. And, you know, I have to meet with clients and you got to deal with drunk people. And there's all these other things that I never really thought about, but I just had the right attitude about it. You know, it's kind of like they say, when the student is ready, the master appears. Well, I feel it's the same way in this regard. You know, I get it though. What are you going to do? Just jump out and start moonlighting? And what are you going to do? But sometimes you could start a side thing, and then that's what, and a lot of people I know, they start a side thing and then they slowly get away from their corporate job or whatever it is. And then you can even get into consulting. And this is something I thought about. I'm like, why don't I do wedding consulting? I've been to so many weddings. I know exactly how they flow. And every time I meet with clients, like I just had a meeting earlier, we do a final meeting like a few weeks or a month before to go over everything. A lot of them have the same questions, and all these questions they have, I just answer them. It's just like second nature to me, you know? So it's just things like that. Think about what, you know, what life experience that you have, what are you good at? And like you said, a lot of people, because they have money, they would rather give you that money than take the time to go do that little simple task or whatever it is, because they don't feel like learning how to work Adobe. You know, there's so much of that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what you do when you're DJing, it's like, is somebody at a wedding capable of pushing play on a playlist? Yes, they are. They don't want to. They want to be enjoying the wedding. So you're providing that service for them, and you're doing it much better than they would be able to. You know how, I'm assuming you've done this forever, you know how to use all of the equipment. They don't know how to do that. You're bringing better equipment than they would ever have. You're bringing more understanding of being able to read a room full of people and know when you need to pump the energy up and when it's time to go back down a little bit. People think that if you're DJing, you're just sitting there pushing play, but it's not. It's like you're reading the energy of the room, and you're putting music out there that is going to fit in that moment. And that moment can change 2 minutes later. And then you have to go, okay, what song am I going to put on here next? So you're providing that service for people, and they would much rather pay you than try to do that by themselves. It's like, you know, and that's the thing, is there's endless things like that you can do. There's endless services that you can provide for people that will make you money. It just has to be competitive, and you have to do it well. And that's the thing that I wrote an article for Beartaria Times that I put out, and in that article I said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you just have to make a decent wheel, because there are enough people that need wheels that you don't have to make anything special. You just have to make a decent one, and be a good person and have a good reputation, and people will come to you if they need something. What I do with the Etsy stuff, I had no plans on doing that. I just saw it one day and realized I'm sitting here for the same reason. I'm buying files on Etsy to print, to make stuff. And I'm like, why could I not just make the files? This was a couple years ago. And so now I did that. And I don't even, dude, I have put so little work into that. I think I probably have 4 or 5 dozen files to choose from. They're all kind of weird pop culture reference type things. Each one takes me about 3 minutes to make on my computer, another 2 minutes to upload on Etsy, and then I never touch it again. I literally don't touch it. I haven't done anything on Etsy in probably a year now. Every single week, money gets deposited into my bank account, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. There are people that make 6 figures doing that just on Etsy, selling digital files. Owen actually talked about this today on his stream, talking about how it's never been better than it is right now. Because back in the day, you had to have like a skill, a job that you could go and do and execute in order to make money. And now it's like you have a million ways that you can make money. And he actually used Etsy as an example, saying that you can go on Etsy and sell like sewing patterns. People buy that, like you don't realize when you go to like Joann's Fabrics and you want a sewing pattern for a blouse or shirt or a skirt or whatever, you're paying like $10-15 for that pattern. So make a pattern in a digital download file, sell it on Etsy for $5. Passive income, and as you said, Brandon, start somewhere, start building something. I went through a dozen tried and failed, burned to the ground miserably attempts at starting a business before the wood shop. And it was just one of those things where it's like the time was right. When you feel that thing in your gut telling you, if I don't do this, then I'm going to regret it, then jump on it. Cause that's probably someone upstairs telling you it's time to try.
Yeah. And you're always going to have, well, not always, but a lot of times you're going to have people around you who are going to doubt you and they're going to tell you you're crazy and all this stuff. That's, going back to the DJing thing, like, or so many people like, oh, do you have a real job too? That's the thing they say. Oh, do you have a job during the week? And I'm like, yeah, I got this podcast called the Brandon Bonanza and the Oversharing Show. That's my job during the week now. But there's a bunch of stuff I do, but I'm like, no, this is basically my main source of income. And I was just like, but I love doing it, and can you say that about, well, I mean, I've worked so many jobs. I've worked at some, Zindra was talking about working at a grocery store. I worked at a grocery store for a couple of years. I worked at car dealerships, car washes. Like I worked with a printing press guy for a while. So I first got laid off in 2008 from the car business thing, and which is great because it's like a vacation you could collect. I mean, I don't do this anymore, but this is my former thought process. And I was working with this guy who would move newspaper printing presses like New York Times and all these different stuff. He would just go in and he'd either fix them or he would move them. And they're these giant machines and you need like a jackhammer because they literally get cemented in to be level the whole time. So you just go there with coveralls on, you get really dirty, but it was really good money. So, I mean, you just get a skill. And that's how he did it because he used to work for a big company that did it. And then he just branched off on his own and made his own and got all these clients and was just making so much money. It was like disgusting. But yeah, I mean,
I also want to say too, circling back to what you said about starting something and building it, I would say that's the most important thing. To tie it back to books, Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, right? Lord of the Rings is arguably, I think The Wheel of Time has sold more copies maybe than Lord of the Rings, but they're neck and neck, dude. It's every year it goes back and forth, right? Lord of the Rings is arguably, I would say, the most important piece of fantasy and what kind of sparked fantasy in general as a genre. Tolkien got rejected by, I think, 27 literary agents when he was trying to pitch Lord of the Rings. He tried to get 27 literary agents for that work with the big publishing houses to acquire his book, and they all turned him down and said no, they had no interest in it. So sometimes it really is a waiting game as well. The same thing happened with J.K. Rowling. I think she had over 50 literary agents that turned her down before somebody finally bit on Harry Potter, and now she's a billionaire, and she like redefined fantasy for an entire generation. I don't know if you guys remember when Harry Potter came out. It was absolutely insane. There were people waiting at bookstores for days for the release of new books. It was madness when a new book would drop. And now she has one of the biggest franchises of all time. And she got passed up by 50 different people. So sometimes it really is about, like, you think if Tolkien or Rowling would have stopped, and at the first time somebody said, no, we don't want your book, and then they would have just said, oh, okay, whatever, and threw it in the trash can and said, yeah, it was a waste of time, I shouldn't have done that. we wouldn't have Lord of the Rings, and like Harry Potter wouldn't exist. All these crazy popular things would not exist. So it really is, I mean, start it and build it. Rowling's story with Harry Potter is like, she was so poor that she was developing characters and stuff on free napkins that she got at coffee houses. Like, she was writing down ideas on napkins because she couldn't afford, a computer or a typewriter or something. So it really is, I would say that's the most important thing, is just start and just build it as slowly as you can. And then if it's meant to be, then it'll happen. But
Yeah, and I think when you're struggling, it really adds to your art because it's all you have in the world at that time. There's really no other distractions for you. And you are just trying everything that you can to make it. Like I was talking before about like bands and stuff and one hit wonders, that's really where, and I see it in comedy a lot too. A lot of comedians will come up and their first special is great. And then their next special or whatever it is, it's just like, it's like because they were struggling when they did this and they were like getting rides from their openers to shows because they didn't have a car or, just all this stuff. That's really important. And I think the level of comfort that we have in the society, you can really, it's different than it used to be. You can struggle, but still do better than like people that lived for thousands of years before us. You know what I mean? You could still have a pretty decent life, is you just have to kind of prioritize all the things in your life and what you really think is important. And also what's comfortable for you, and I think that's another really important thing because that struggle, it creates amazing art.
Dude, J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter, and so I know there's people out there that aren't Harry Potter fans. I read them all because I was like, I think I was sixth grade when the first one came out. So I was like at the perfect age. So I think I was sixth grade when I read the first one. It was epic. And then I just continued reading them. The last one came out when I had just turned 18. I had just moved out. So I read that one and finished it off. But if you look at that original set of 7 books, I like them. There's obviously plot holes, and she isn't like the best author in the world. Some of her writing is sloppy, but they're fun. They're really fun books to read, especially if you're a kid. I had a lot of fun reading them. And then if you look now, 20 years later, to the stuff that she's putting out, as far as like the movies that are coming out that she's involved with, what are they called? The Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them movies. And they're terrible. They're nothing like her original work. And it's like, because she's writing them as a billionaire now, not as somebody who's begging for free coffee, burnt coffee at a coffee shop and then taking a handful of napkins and using them to write her story down on. That struggle, that crucible that you just sit there and burn in is what makes you give your all, because you want so badly to get out of it. You're not going to write a Harry Potter series as a billionaire. It just isn't going to happen. Like Tolkien did the same thing. He started writing Lord of the Rings and like thinking about these things while literally in a trench in the middle of war. Like, he started writing this kind of allegorical story of what he was witnessing in the real world, but in a fantasy one. And it's so easy to see if you really study Tolkien's work. It was a form of escapism. So it's like we read his work to escape the world that we're living in. He wrote his work in his head while he's getting, shells are falling down around him and he's in a foxhole in a trench somewhere in, a world war. That when you're really down in the dumps, that's when I would say try the most, because that's where the most incredible stuff is going to be created. You don't see, I just saw I saw an article about whatever J.K. Rowling's doing now. She wrote some new book and I read the title and it was like some trans women's activist gets beat up for saying some racial it was literally like every trigger word in the description of what the book is about. And I'm like, Man, you wrote such good children's books and now you're a billionaire and you're trying to like make a statement and people are like, get out of here. They want nothing to do with it. It's crazy how that happens.
Just give up, enjoy your billions, lady. Go
Yeah,
get a
Papa
jet
just said
ski.
she doesn't have anything to prove. Exactly. Exactly. She doesn't have anything to prove now. She's trying to make a statement, but nobody's listening.
Yeah, and I think that's another lesson or something we could share with people. Not that we've made it or anything, but it's like you just have to kind of remember what your values are. And I think if you are doing it with that in mind, not only to create a beautiful story or whatever, but also to reach people that are where you were maybe when you were younger, and now you're trying to pay it forward, basically, the same way like Tolkien did it for some people. And I'm sure he had his inspirations too, people that he read and stuff that he was inspired by that got him through those awful times. And going back to like what Owen was saying, we don't have to go to wars anymore. Like, you got to sign up for that now. You don't just get thrust into a freaking trench somewhere in France or whatever it was, in the worst living conditions ever. We have like the worst things we have to worry about is, like the best things that they could even imagine, back then. So
Yep.
we're just really getting in our own way. And I really feel it has to do with just the way that societies evolve in general. Like, I was talking to my friend Joe P. He was on the Oversharing show, and we just had him on again, so that'll be coming out in a couple weeks. But he was talking about that with consciousness. It seemed like the level of consciousness and truth was like higher around the world, like in the 80s, and that's how this empire, whatever society was kind of built. And now it's declining because those people aren't around anymore, really. I mean, they're older or whatever, but everybody is living off of that opulence that was created, and now they don't really know how to do the simple things like we're talking about right now, about how to support yourself or just how to create a good society. So I feel like because of that, we're kind of, our generations or whatever, the people around now are a little softer. And so we are more, our roadblocks are really internal, because we put up these ideas of how we think everything should be and how we think we should live, and we should have a house and two cars in the driveway or whatever it is, all these ideas. And when we don't, we feel like a failure. And that's just us telling us that. It's just on us. Even if society, that's what they think, or people might be like, oh, why didn't you get a real job? Or, what's your real job? But I could have let that bother me. I know a lot of DJs that got out of it. Not that that's the best thing to do, but they just stopped doing it so they can go do some corporate job and make like a bunch of money instead, And like, I know one guy who was awesome. Like, he was a really funny MC. And when I started, he was doing it, and he was just wild. People loved him, but he got a job in the pharmaceutical realm because he was just making so much money. And now I see him and he's like with his family going to like Block Island and stuff, which is great, I'm sure, but it's like, I don't know, is it eating your soul though? Like,
Yeah. I like what you just said
do you have an
about
ulcer? Like, yeah.
I like what you just said about our problems are internal now, because that is straight up facts, bro. Like back in the day, you'd be like, oh, like, well, I lost 4 kids this winter and the house burned down and I lost all my cows. So better go build another house. And, Martha, go drop your trousers. We got to get more workers. We got to have more kids. And now it's like someone gets embarrassed on social media and they kill themselves because they can't deal with it. Like they have so much going on internally that they just can't function anymore. It's like everything in this life is a pendulum constantly swinging back and forth. And there's that extreme over there where it's all external, right? Oh, the Dust Bowl happened. I lost everything. But I'm so mentally strong from suffering for so long that it's like, whatever. I'll put a, bandana around my face and just walk west, and eventually life will get better.
It's the third time this year my house burned down. Whatever, we'll just build a new one. Like,
yeah, exactly. It's like, the bear got my arm, but at least it didn't kill me.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
I got another.
Nothing could crush you mentally. And now we're at a place where it's like you have everything at your disposal. disposal. Like anything that you could ever want. I was talking in the chat of Owen's stream today about this as well, just putting comments in, like anything you could ever want to learn how to do, you can do it for free. You did not have that 100, 200 years ago. Like you had to know somebody personally. You had to give years of learning skills and learning a trade or whatever it is, studying with people, you know, joining some sort of guild where this is what they do all day long, and you can learn all the ancient secrets that they have on how to do something well. And now it's like you have YouTube. You can learn something in 20 minutes and you can pause it and you can play it at half speed if you're really not getting it. Like there's endless things that you can learn, anything that you want to learn now, but people still can't cope. They're like, life is so difficult now. And it's like, could you even fathom like 200 years ago being like, I need to learn how to do something, and then someone throws a stupid block at you and you look at it and someone's on that block telling you exactly how to, like literally answering every question that you have. Dude, we have it way better in so many respects than they did back then. But at the same time, it's like, it's that cycle, man. It's that wheel of time of, you know, good men, strong men, good times, hard times. It's like, yeah, we have everything that we could want right now, but people can't fucking talk to each other, man. People can't stand hearing a word of criticism without it just completely destroying them.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And it goes back to the quote that I said, because it's hard for us because we have such a limited view, because allegedly we only live 70 or 80 or 120 years. So we can't see the big picture. And if you could actually see the big picture of the real history and zoom out, you could just see that it's just cycles that go, right? And right now we're in that time, just like Gandalf said one day, or Tolkien made him say, that we don't get to pick what part of the wheel we're at. Like, that's not part of this. You don't get to pick, no, I want to be there. No. You get thrown into that part of the wheel where you are in that cycle, and then you just get to choose what you do with that time that you're given. And it's such a precious gift. I'm getting chills right now saying this, but it really is. And I think if I'll just say in my own life, when as I started to embody that and what that really means and put it into work, like it's hard for me now to even get upset or in despair about things, because I just keep playing devil's advocate about something that comes up, like even somebody crashed into my car, and this was in 2021, and I had my truck sitting for a while because it wasn't registered or insured, because I was like, 2020 was really brutal for me. So I had it sitting, but it still ran and stuff. So I was working at a car dealership helping my friend out. So he just gave me a car to drive. And one day I had to move my DJ equipment, and I was going to get a van from the dealership. It wasn't working out. And the guy at the DJ place was like, come on. He's like, you got to move this stuff. I need to do something or whatever. So I just took my truck. The one time I took it, and I get on the highway and there's terrible traffic, bumper to bumper. So I just go to get off the next exit, and you got to go in the breakdown lane for like 100 feet while you do it. And everybody was doing it, but somebody was like, oh, this is a great idea. Some kid, and he just ran right into me. And so I was like, man, and then the cops showed up, and I was like, you know what? I'm just not even upset about this. I was actually talking to the police. Like, I'm like trying some of that law stuff out that I learned. I'm like, do I have to give you my license? He's like, no, you don't. I was like, wow. And I was having a conversation with him. I was like, man, I'm so glad that we have people like you out here. I mean, it must be a crazy time to be a cop, just like talking to him like a real person. And he ended up letting me not get towed, because I was like, listen, if they tow this car, I might lose, my truck. I don't really have money to pay for the tow and all this stuff. And I had a dealer plate with me from the job, but I wasn't like, I'm not using this in the accident. Like I'll take my hit for not registering my car or whatever. I just want to use it to drive home. And I talked him into, after the tow truck showed up, I talked him into it, and he let me go. And then I had to go to court, and short story long. I was kind of, there was all that covering of smiling faces going on. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So I called the court and I told them, and they're like, all right, we'll put you in touch with the marshal. And it turns out the marshal's the head bouncer at a bar that I DJ at. And he goes to me, oh, all this stuff that's going on. He's like, this is such bullshit. He's like, it's such bullshit. He's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. So it ended up, they called me and he's like, I got you a Zoom meeting. And I've seen all the videos of like Zoom court and how terrible it was. This was nothing like that. It's noon. The judge is sitting at his desk eating a sandwich. The DA's there, and I couldn't get my sound to work because it wasn't on Zoom. It was something else. So I finally did. They're like, all right, before you start, we just want to tell you, we talked to the parents of the kid, and I guess they realized that it was kind of his fault, even though he lied to the cop, because obviously he hit me. Even if I was in the breakdown lane, he still hit me, But they said, listen, he has a $250 deductible. If you pay that, we'll drop everything. And I'm like, even the no insurance shit? And they're like, sure. They're like, yeah, we'll drop it all. Like it never happened. And I was like, okay. And then they go, we'll even give you a couple months to pay it or whatever. So that whole time I could have been fearing and been upset and like, oh man, I got to deal with court. And now it's going to be on, I could lose my license because they take the insurance thing really serious here in the insurance state of Connecticut. They will, like, the DMV will just revoke your license, and you got to like prove to them all this stuff anyway. So all those thoughts were going on, but I was like, I'm just, you know what, that's not for me. Like, I'm just going to be fine. And it's crazy. So you really have to, well, I hate to tell people what to do, but I'll just say in my life, since I've been realizing that, it's just like this victim narrative just evaporates. Anytime I start to feel it, I'm like, oh, am I being a victim right now? Why am I being a victim? Like you said, people ask me all the time, they'll say, how do you have all these websites and how do you podcast? How'd you learn how to do it? I'm like, I learned it from a 12-year-old on YouTube, probably, like anything you need to do, just type it in and there's a kid or a person or like some Indian guy or whatever it is. That's how I learned how to do live stream through Zoom. This dude had an 8-minute video, and I was like, oh, okay, here we go. But people think that all these things are hard and they kind of just use it as an excuse, I think, to not do it and to just stay where they are because they're comfortable. And I think that comfort is really, it could be nice, but I think comfort is a big enemy that you can have, so it's like,
yeah, dude, think about just the publishing world in itself, right? 150 years ago, how are you getting your book published? Do you even know how to read? Did you ever learn how to write? Like, you made it past the age of 12, you already won the lottery in this
yes.
life. So, but nowadays it's like, go to a Barnes and Noble. How many tens or hundreds of thousands of different authors are there on those shelves? We often take this for granted and we don't look at those details. We just see a wall of books and we go, well, I'm here for this book and I know that it's over here. But you're walking by tens of thousands of other authors' work. So when you want to write a book, you go, oh, but I'll never get published. But it's like, there are hundreds of publishers now. Like, there's the big four, right? There used to be five, two of them consolidated. So now there's four of the real big publishing houses. But there are all these other smaller publishers, and you can do like a form of hybrid publishing where it's not self-publishing on Amazon or fully traditional publishing, but it's kind of like a half and half. Like you're more involved with the process than traditional publishing. There's all these different avenues that you can go down now for publishing your work. And it's like, dude, imagine if you wanted to write a book 100 years ago, there was no other option. You had to know somebody in the publishing world that would get your book out. And I would argue it probably had to serve some kind of an agenda as well, because they controlled everything. I could have this book out on Amazon it's like a 3-day waiting period, but I could have it out in 3 days. I could have it out by Friday if I wanted to. I would just format it and then upload it, and then it's there. Nobody's telling me that I can't make it. I don't have to ask permission for anybody. I just upload it on Amazon, and then it prints on demand. If somebody buys it, they print one out and they ship it out. I don't have to do shit, man. I don't have to do shit. And 100 years ago, it was not like this. So it really is, like, in so many ways way better than it was. It's astonishing if you really sit and think about it, and then try to realize that means that it's better for you too. You're not going to a bookstore and being like, which 5 books do I have to choose from this year that have been published? It's like you go to a bookstore, there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of books at a giant bookstore from tens or hundreds of thousands of authors. So when you tell yourself, like, I can't write a book, I'll never get published, I'm sure that every single one of those 100,000 authors thought the same thing at some point. You just got to do it.
Yeah, I was thinking that earlier. Exactly. It's amazing. And the thing about the times we're in now, it's possible that we might see the end of all this. But again, it goes back to, just doing what you have in the time that is allotted to you. I feel like there's always a way provided as long as you keep that right state of mind, because I don't believe that we're just random. We came out of a puddle of ooze and lightning hit it and we're just a random accident. If you have that belief system, I look at that as a limiting belief system, because it just disconnects you from everything and it makes you really think that there's no purpose. But when you realize it and you see it in your own life, that there is some kind of purpose to all this and everybody does play a role or can play a role if they choose to, then you just it's like that leap of faith you take. It reminds me of Indiana Jones in the one he did with Sean Connery, the Holy Grail or whatever, that one, where
Yeah.
there was all these tests he had to go through when he went into the mountain cave or whatever, or that cave. And one of them was the leap of faith. And he basically just like put a foot out there and he was in between. There was this chasm and there was like a hole on each side, like a little hallway. And he couldn't see the bridge that was there because it blended in. So he just took a leap of faith and then he realized it was there. It's that same kind of thing. You just kind of have to sometimes at a certain point, take a leap of faith. And then if you fail, there could be lessons there. There's a reason maybe you failed. Maybe if you made it right away, you go down the street and you get hit by a bus. I always say that to people. I'm like, don't regret your past because you could have got hit by a bus. You never know,
Yeah, big facts, man. It's like you could leave somewhere 30 seconds later and your life would be over. You never know. And it's, dude, I had like the craziest experience yesterday. I'll share it with you. So I'm re-greasing my wife's KitchenAid stand mixer, right? She's had it for probably many years and I haven't done it. So I was like, I'm going to rip this thing apart and put new grease in it. I take the whole thing apart. I put new grease in it, plug it in. It's not working. I go, oh shit, I just broke my wife's KitchenAid mixer. I don't want to spend another $500 to get her a new one. So I'm trying to diagnose this and she was upstairs putting the girls down for a nap. So eventually I text her and I go, hey, can you come down here when you're done? She's like, yeah, I'll be down in a minute. She comes downstairs. I'm like, babe, I'm sorry. I mean, I know technically it had to be me because I'm the one that's working on it, but it's not working. I don't know. I didn't touch it. I didn't touch anything back here. I touched all of the worm drives and the gears up front, the mechanical stuff. I didn't touch the motor or the boards or anything like that, but it's not working now. I can't get it to work. So I sit there and I'm feeling guilty and I'm feeling terrible. And I'm sitting there and I'm trying everything that I can think of. And then we have a little battery charger plugged into the outlet on the wall. She goes, wait, this isn't charging. I'm like, oh, that's weird. She goes, maybe it's this plug. So then I go out into the garage and I check the breakers and there's no circuit blown. There's no circuit breaker switched. And I'm like, nah, it probably can't be that. So then I go, I don't know, maybe I'll try plugging it over on this one on the other side of the kitchen. And I plug it in and it's not working. But that one's one of those GFE plugs with the little reset button. So I press it, turns on. I'm holding the top of the stand mixer in my hand. It's all dismantled, right? But I'm holding it and I plug it in. I click the button and it goes, it starts working. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness it's working. So I get the thing put together halfway. I don't have it on the actual bottom part of like the stand portion of the stand mixer. I just have the top portion where all the gears are. I forget to put the back on because that thing has two pieces, the stand mixer. It's got these two pieces right here. And then it's got a semicircle on the back that butts up against it. I put these two pieces together. I didn't put the back on. And so I got everything back together and I'm like, I'm just going to just to, clear my conscience, make sure it's working before I do the rest. I'm going to plug it in and make sure it's working. I plug it in. I have this thing resting on my belly. I didn't realize I didn't put the back on. The wires coming from the wall are touching my stomach. Like all the circuit boards and all those electrical leads are right pressed into my stomach. I plug it in, I turn it on to high. It took like 5 seconds for me to realize that I was standing there with 120 volts wires just pressed into my stomach and nothing happened. And when I realized it, I pulled it away real quick and went, holy shit, I could have just killed myself. And this is the crazy thing, because I've done electronics since high school, right? I know how to solder. I know how to make stuff. I made my own guitar pedals, my effects pedals. I made my own sound activated light displays that would flash to the beat of a kick drum. I know all about this. I've done it forever. And that one momentary lapse of judgment, I could have killed myself, but I didn't. So it's like you could leave 30 seconds later and something can happen, or you could do something stupid like that and someone's watching out for you. Like, dude, I had the positive and the negative pressed into my stomach, touching my skin, bare wires.
Wow.
Nothing happened. And yeah, the moral of that story is like we have it a lot better in a lot of ways than we could ever know. And a lot of the times you get so wrapped up in the ego and the victim narrative, whether or not you think you're trying to be a victim. Most people are in some way, shape, or form. Like there are those whispers in the back of your head, but it's like everything is better than it used to be, and you're constantly being looked out for. That was just a crazy example that I had happen yesterday, because it literally should have killed me. It should have killed me. I should have taken 120 volts literally straight to my heart. And it didn't.
Who would I have live streamed with if you died? Jeez, I would have been like, oh, poor me. I got a guest tonight. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man. You like, we don't know. This realm is a mystery. We don't really exactly know. So you might as well at least enjoy the mystery while you can,
and
that's
be grateful.
Say. Yeah.
Like I for a minute was scared afterwards, and then I immediately thank you. Because I, like, by all, of our human physics and understanding of electricity and everything, I should have died, but I didn't. And it's like, why didn't I die? Shane, my wife was like, maybe it's the shirt that you're wearing. And I'm like, no, this is not rubber. This does not block 120 volts.
Yeah, no, not at all. That'll jump.
Yeah, it goes straight through you. So obviously, it was not my time. And if it's not my time, then that means that I've got something here to be doing. So I always just go through life with gratitude and focusing on the good stuff. And tying it back to what you were saying, you were talking originally about it. Maybe it's not the right time for something to work. And that's 100% what it is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I can't say I disagree with any of that. And I think we've did about 2 hours. So
cool.
Unless there's anything else you want to say or talk about, or where can people get you have any plans for where you're going to sell it or anything like that?
So my book, I'm going to attempt to do traditional publishing. So it'll probably be quite some time before it's released. I'm really going to give it an honest effort, trying to find a literary agent and then shooting it up that ladder so that it can be published by a major publishing house and then be in all of your Barnes and Nobles and everywhere. So I don't know how long that process is going to take. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a literary agent in a week, and then other times it takes you a year. So I'm just putting it in God's hands at this point. And if it's meant to be, then it's meant to be. But in the meantime, I'm going to write the other 2 books and probably do cover art and start thinking about everything else that's involved in this. So.
Well, I like that. I like that you're not selling yourself short. You're going to go for it and see what happens. Because the worst thing that can happen is they all say no, all 72 or 50 of them or whatever it is. And then, but yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, and then I always have Amazon to fall back on, man. I can at any point put it up there. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Nick, for coming on the show. This was awesome. A couple of people in there. Let's see. Chris, who's Quiet Sparky Bear, said, I'm so digging this. And then he said another comment I wanted to read because it was really awesome. Let me see if I could find it here. So much chat going on. This is great, guys. Something about like how this is an awesome conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad people like it.
Yeah. People are really digging this kind of stuff. Well,
I'm
thank
gonna
you guys.
throw
And it, oh,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
throw you a quote real quick before we end.
Yeah, please do.
This is from J.R.R. Tolkien. It says, I found it is the small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorite Tolkien quotes.
Yeah. It's so true. Amen to that. Well, everyone, if you'd like to support me, you can go to morelawsmoreproblems.com, the website I've had for almost 10 years now. I can't wait. I'm going to have to do some kind of celebration. You could go read my blog, or you could read what I was talking about back in 2013 if you want to, all the way up to now. I think I put one out in 2021 and I'm working on some new stuff. So stay tuned and check out the Over Sharon show. I do it with my great friend Sharon, and Nick's been on there too. So you can find that at Brandon Bonanza on YouTube right on this channel, or you can go to, we have a Telegram thing. Just go to morelawsmoreproblems.com. It's all there and you'll find it. And yeah, I just want to thank you one more time. This was awesome. And everybody have a good night. All right. We are done. That was awesome.
Awesome.